Welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Siege of Yorktown. If you're familiar with a little bit of Revolutionary War history, you may know that Yorktown is the battle that's going to be the one that's going to kind of be the last big one. And so if we look at what was going on here, if you remember, General Charles Cornwallis was leading that Carolina campaign to move north and basically try to trap George Washington between Henry Clinton's army at New York and his army coming up from the south. But Cornwallis had been slowed down by militia attacks, by all kinds of problems he had in the Carolinas, and then they had that battle at Guilford Courthouse in which he won, but he had lost a good percentage of his troops, and so he ends up going to Yorktown, Virginia, in the hopes that he would get reinforcements from the sea by the British Navy and by Henry Clinton up in New York. But what was going on in the meantime? If we look here, George Washington and a good chunk of the Continental Army were camped there just outside of New York City, and basically that was in the autumn of 1780. And George Washington's plan was after the winter into 1781, he was going to attack New York City. Of course, he was hoping that French reinforcements would show up by that point, and he would be able to get Henry Clinton out of New York City. But what ends up happening is George Washington receives a few bits of information. All right. For one thing, he finds out that Cornwallis is there at Yorktown. And again, George Washington was from Virginia. He knew that Yorktown was not a very good spot to defend, that it would be a possibly easy spot that he could attack Cornwallis. He also finds out that his good friend, Marquis de Lafayette, who of course was one of the early French leaders that came over, had Cornwallis trapped there on this peninsula, and I'll show you a map here in a moment where you can see where Yorktown was at. But also he finds out, he thought all along that the French were going to be coming towards New York when really their full force arrived to help the Americans. He finds out that actually the French are heading for Virginia. And so George Washington makes a big decision. He decides, I'm going to head south, and I'm going to try to see if, Lafayette and myself can take out Cornwallis. All right, and so what he does is he has to really do this in secret because he wants to make sure Henry Clinton thinks that he's still going to attack him at New York. Otherwise, Henry Clinton would send reinforcements down to Cornwallis. And so George Washington, this whole movement's got to be kind of masked, and he's got to kind of set up decoys to kind of make the British think that he's still remaining there at New York. All right, and so he begins to march his army south towards Virginia. Let's take a look at where Yorktown is located. All right, so if we look here again, George Washington was up here in New York. He begins to march south towards Virginia. If we zoom in, here we can see in Virginia, here is Yorktown. All right, so you can see it's out here on this peninsula, actually not too far from where Jamestown was at. Remember, the first permanent English settlement in America. All right, and so Yorktown located right here, and George Washington plans on trying to surround Cornwallis, who is camped here in Yorktown. So we look at the battle map here. All right, here you can see George Washington arrives, and by the time the French arrive as well, there's a combined force of about 15,000 Americans and French troops that surround Cornwallis. Is about 6,000 that are there in Yorktown. And actually, there's a naval battle called the Battle of Virginia Capes, in which the French basically break that British blockade that the British had up since the beginning of the war, and basically guarantee that Cornwallis cannot escape by sea. And also, the French are able then to bring in heavy artillery, bring in French troops that are able to then bombard Yorktown. All right, and so starting on October 9th, 1781, the French and the Americans begin this just bombardment of Yorktown. All right, and if you look closely at the map here, you can see there's these little things, these little forts that were called redoubts that the British had built to try to defend the city. Basically, it was a gradual fight. As the Americans pushed closer, they would take each redoubt and push closer and closer and closer. All right, eventually moving all the way in to the city. All right, and so eventually, on October 19th, 1781, the British surrender. Actually, Cornwallis himself refused to attend the surrendering ceremony, but here you can see this is the famous painting that's actually in the rotunda of our Capitol building in Washington, D.C. That is a painting of the surrender of the British at Yorktown. All right, and so basically Cornwallis surrenders this entire army to the Americans and to the French. And so this loss at Yorktown really convinces the British that the war is too costly to continue. You got to remember the British were fighting this war on several fronts. It wasn't just simply in America now, since the French had joined into the war. All right, so this is the battle that basically ends it for the Americans. I mean, yes, it's going to be a couple more years before the treaty is finally signed, but this is it. So hopefully you learned something there. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you later. Thanks.